Please welcome today's presenters, Priya Raghupati and Ishani Deshmukh.
Hey everyone, I'm Ishani. I'm a manager with the ZS Princeton office. I have worked across multiple analytics and technology projects for commercial over the last several years. Over the last couple of years, I've been leading an engagement with Bristol Myers Squibb to support enterprise analytics across all their functions. I'm excited to show you what we've achieved so far and how you could take it ahead in your organization.
Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are having a great day at the ZS Impact Summit. My name is Priya Raghupati, and I'm the head of corporate analytics in the Business Insights and Analytics organization at Bristol Myers Squibb. In my current role, my team and I are responsible for building and delivering analytical capabilities for our enterprise functions like HR, legal, compliance, audit, finance, corporate affairs, and procurement. And the remit by itself includes the enablement of the full suite of descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. I joined BMS in 2005, and my first 11 years were focused on driving analytics and insights for the commercial organization. And prior to BMS, I actually worked at ZS for about 6 years. So for me, it's an absolute pleasure to be here and present at my alma mater's Impact Summit. All right, so let's get started. So, both Ishani and I are very excited to be here today to share with you guys the amazing experience and learnings that we have had in the application of analytics to get the actionable insights and to use it to drive strategic choices and decisions for all the enterprise functions. Or I think in some companies, they call it corporate functions, or in some other companies, they call it enabling functions. So before we begin, let's make sure that we clarify the definition of these functions as Ishani and I think about it for this presentation, right? So we are defining them as the functions that are not business functions, but they are core to the delivery of business functions. So in the world of biotech and pharma, it is all the functions excluding R&D, commercial, and manufacturing. So all the functions that drive the business, like finance, HR, corporate communications, legal, functions like audit and compliance, as well as procurement. So these are all the functions that we are focusing on in terms of the application of analytics and that we are going to talk about today. So now, at this point, this sounds like a very broad remit in terms of the topics that we're going to talk about, right? And that's right, because to a certain extent, each of these functions are fundamentally different with fundamentally very different objectives, and it has very different types of teams and leaders who drive and deliver the work. So for example, an HR professional and their objectives and the kind of work that they do are fundamentally different, and they won't replicate with the objectives of, say, like the legal organization. So the analytics needed are probably fundamentally different for each of these functions, which means it might lead you to believe sort of to say, hey, look, you need completely independent teams with very different types of skills to drive the analytics for compliance, which must be very different than the analytics for corporate communications, which means doing something like this must be a huge investment, right? That could kind of be where you would get to. The answer, however, is no. And so our goal for Ishani and me, since we do want to save a few minutes for Q&A in the next 15 minutes, is to summarize the types of analytics that are needed for each of these functions, the incredible value that it delivers and drives, and the somewhat nominal investment that it actually takes to bring this to life. So I talked about 15 minutes. I'm talking about, getting a lot of value starting. So I feel like I'm starting to sound like a Geico commercial, like, 15 minutes can save you 15% or more on car insurance. But I may not quite save you on car insurance, but Ishani and I can promise you this. These next 15 minutes will definitely save you at least 15% or more of the effort that's probably going in some of these functions where they're running maybe some basic reports, like a headcount report, what's the paid media spend. Even the effort there, you can reduce it by making the investment we are talking about. But more importantly, we will uncover the tremendous value that organizations can realize by investing in analytics for the enterprise functions. But we will also be transparent about the success factors that are required, right? And while some of them may not need huge dollars and resources, it does need certain key things like unwavering leadership commitment, which sometimes, honestly, is hard to find and even harder to sustain.
So let's get started. So first and foremost, let's make sure we explain the types of analytics that each of these functions need. In the interest of time, we won't go to the details of how we figured out the suite of analytics required. That's going to be a session of its own. But very quickly, and to summarize, we reviewed like the objectives of each of the organization, the strategic objectives, discussed at length the execution plan to achieve those objectives, and then used that to determine what analytics are required to measure the execution as well as the leading and lagging indicators of performance. We then use this to build a continuum of descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive analytics required for each function. So for example, for HR, if the organizational focus is people strategy and employee sentiment, then the analytics include the ability to track talent acquisition, development, and retention. It also includes analytics to diagnose the drivers of success and engagement through something like health check analytics, as well as initiatives like diversity and inclusion. For risk monitoring functions like audit, compliance, and even finance and legal, the analytics drives the tracking of metrics that can flag risk, such as your healthcare provider interactions with reps, spend limits, duplicate payments, inventory controls, and in general, analyzing risk at an enterprise level. So this includes areas like flagging outliers, market level analysis for various metrics, and so on. For corporate communications, analytics helps us track the impact of our campaigns across different platforms like email, web, and social media. This is across different audience types like employees, patients, healthcare providers, external job seekers, and so many more. This area also includes analytics to study corporate reputation as a driver, as an example. For procurement, analytics helps us analyze third-party spend to identify opportunities for saving and plan for a long-term 3 to 5 year procurement roadmap using cost and market intelligence. So let's do a quick poll right now, just to gauge on where each of your organizations might be in terms of maturity in this enterprise analytics. Hey, Lena, would you mind going to the other question, please? Thank you. It would be the other question, Lena. Sorry. Yes, thank you. So if everybody answer this question, we would love to see where.
Yep. And so as you guys answer this poll, the way you want to think about it is either you see your company as having not started this. Early stage might mean that you have some basic reports, maybe like headcount reports in HR, but there are some basic reports, but not a whole lot. Intermediate stage would mean that, you have, quite a few of the basic reports in place and maybe some diagnostics. And mature would mean that not only do you have the full suite of like tracking performance metrics and diagnosing them, but perhaps you also have the predictive capabilities like, setting goals and forecasts and so on. So let's see what the results are.
So it looks like most folks are in the early or the intermediate stage, which is sort of what we expected. If all of you were in the mature stage, it might have been difficult for us to continue with the session and sharing learnings. It might have been to be the other way around, but this is good. It's hopefully, whoever's in the early stage or not started can start thinking about moving to the intermediate and then eventually to the mature stage. We can just now talk about why is this analytics really important. So we can go to the next slide, Dana. So really, the business impact of having the entire breadth of these analytical capabilities is phenomenal, as it really helps functions break out of tactical decision-making towards strategic choices with the help of data-driven intelligence. So for example, for HR, what this means is being able to find and attract top talent, then help the same talent develop and have very successful careers. Doing this successfully means that we have the best people working on cutting-edge therapies and a sales force who has passion and commitment to ensure that healthcare professionals have all the information they need to treat the right patient at the right time with the best possible support. Now, as you all know, healthcare is a highly regulated industry where great power to improve people's quality of life comes with the great responsibility of doing it with the highest integrity possible. Now, analytics has helped us get ahead of any rogue behavior of an employee or external partner through risk monitoring analytics like compliance and so on. It means we're always compliant with institutional policies of government or state. Advanced analytics has also helped us find patterns and trends so that we can predict emerging risks in certain markets, and then we can get ahead of it and put more controls in place.
So let's talk about some of the other areas, right? So for procurement, what this means is having analytics will help you really understand your supplier base. It will really help you make sure that you can find synergies that you may not have seen otherwise. For example, when you look at why there is spend with your non-preferred vendors, it might help you understand what the drivers are, and either you can choose to then convert them into preferred vendors, which means you can drive better negotiations and better deals for your firm. The other piece that it also helps you with is to get ahead of understanding your supplier's performance and risks, such as disruption issues, right? So if you think about it, this is the year of COVID, and this has probably been one of the most important and critical analytics needed for many firms, especially for global companies like Bristol Myers Squibb, where you have a global footprint and a global supply chain. So understanding what is happening where and trying to get ahead of any disruption issues becomes very critical, because we need to make sure that no matter what, our ability to support our patients is not impacted. Now let's wear a different lens. So for corporate communications, so when you think about their role, which is focused on sharing messages both internally and externally, it's a very complex world, right? So in today's world, where everyone is getting bombarded from every possible platform and is suffering from information overload, how do we get efficient so we are at the right platform with the right audience, with the right focused message so the information is meaningful? And this can be very complex, right? Internally, you might be using channels like email, that is an intranet, maybe companies have like a Yammer platform. And now externally, you have all that, but you also have all the social media platforms. So there's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and how many else more, right? So, and in each of these platforms, you have different audiences who engage in very different ways. So the analytics can be complex, but by having it in place, it really helps you see what information is useful to whom, in what platform, and vice versa, what wasn't useful and why, right? So then you can reallocate that time and resources away from places that it's not needed, and it can be in the places where there is a need for information and support. And what this also leads to is that for companies, it helps them better understand how they are being viewed by the external audience. It helps drive their corporate reputation, and it also helps them make sure that the way they are perceived in the outside community is consistent with the facts of the company itself. So this is very critical. So now that we've talked a little bit about why this is important for organizations, let's do a second poll. Lena, if you can pull up the poll, it's the second one. All right, so here you go. So here's the question. How long does it take to have most of the descriptive analytics along with some of the diagnostics in place? Right, so this is kind of like that intermediate stage that we talked about in the previous poll. So the choices are 6 to 10 months, 12 to 18 months, or 2 years and more. Okay, and let's see the results of the poll. Interesting. So most people seem to think that it's between the 6 to 10 months or the 12 to 18 months. And you're about right. So the reality is that you can have most of the descriptive analytics, once you have the focused understanding of the organization and the function, you can have most of the descriptive analytics in place in 6 to 10 months. It usually goes into the 12 to 18 month stage when you get into a situation where you want to make sure all the backend is set up. So now let's take that to the next slide. So I can share our story from a Bristol Myers Squibb perspective. So at BMS, much like many other companies, our initial focus was to have the best-in-class analytics for our R&D organization, so our research and development, and our commercial functions. And we also have the same thing for our manufacturing function. And what we saw is it led to tremendous value for those functions in making choices and gaining efficiencies. So at that time, what happened is some of the leaders of our enabling functions, enterprise functions, such as our chief HR officer, our chief compliance officer, they flagged the importance of having strong analytics to support their functions. Our CEO, Giovanni Caforio, is a great believer of the value of data and analytics for all functions. So our chief analytics officer, Jeff Conklin, who's my boss, made a focused but somewhat of a small investment in 2017. I was asked to build this out, and I was given some headcount to get started, right? So even though the investment by itself was somewhat nominal, what we did have is a very explicit and unwavering support from the leaders of these organizations. So then from the get-go, we got to focus on what are some of the key capabilities that these functions needed. And we started with HR and compliance and audit. So those were the functions we started with, and we got a lot of early successes and gains. And in short order, we were also requested to support other functions like corporate communications or corporate affairs, as you might call it. And what was interesting is because we sort of took this approach of building analytics and sort of making sure that they stay automated, our focus was we always were in the build form as opposed to the delivery form of what we were doing. So as new functions came to us with the request for analytics, they started showing up with some support. So they showed up with some headcount and some money. And again, I want to be very honest, it wasn't significant. It was probably like 1 or 2 headcount, maybe like $100,000. But we were able to move quickly and build capabilities. And I will say this in all honesty, a big part of it was the focused effort by the team, but also the very strong support from the leadership team in having these analytics built. So what we ended up with is realizing tremendous exponential value of this investment. So for example, on the commercial side, since we were tracking metrics for like the legal team, compliance and audit, we also had HR headcount metrics by function and country, we were able to create a holistic view for the commercial organization, just called the market profile dashboard, where in one place they could see revenue and performance, but also data like compliance and audit and headcount. So they could start seeing trends. And as general managers of countries, they could see trends and start taking actions ahead of time if they saw an issue coming up. So whether it was adding more people, having better technology or training, they were able to do that. And so we as a team ended up getting our CFO award, which is one of the biggest awards at BMS. And we also had a chance to share this capability with our board. And the independent company that watches board meetings, they were unequivocal in their statement that pretty much no other company has a robust tracking mechanism like we did. And it was all because of the investment we made in this particular area, right? So as we enter this year and look into the future, we've now added procurement, and we plan to make more investments in advanced analytics. So such as natural language processing, so we can do better text analytics, and machine learning, so we can do advanced pattern recognition in data dense areas like finance. So what does all of this mean? For Bristol Myers Squibb, what this has meant is we have one of the strongest analytical organizations in the industry. And the reason is, no matter where you work in the company, which country, which function, you now have the set of analytical tools. You know why they are there, you know how to use them, which means to a certain extent, pretty much everybody in the company is an analyst. So in my mind, as I sort of expand that thought, it means we have one of the largest analytical organizations in the world.
That's awesome. Now let's just look at what really is needed to get here, right? So we at VS have worked very closely with Priya and BMS on this journey over the last couple of years. And based on our learnings, and even having a broader view on how many of our clients work, we believe there are some key factors that are required to make such a program a success. The first and foremost, which I think Priya also emphasized on, is the change management that's involved for the enterprise functions. Just to change the way they have been doing things traditionally is very difficult. So there's going to be resistance in the beginning as you start your journey. So it's very important to get senior leadership buy-in. Having a clear understanding and continued support on goals is quite important. Another good way is to identify quick wins and find stakeholders who will pilot and go along this journey with you. You need to build a strong analytics team, which is extremely passionate and takes accountability and has the freedom to think and drive results. The data in this space is scattered across many teams within the organization. So for example, for risk monitoring, you will need to work across the organizations like legal, compliance, finance, cybersecurity, data privacy, technology. This requires in-depth learning of new data sets on a regular basis, identifying analytical opportunities, and then applying advanced techniques to derive insights. You also need to build a very trusted partnership with these enterprise functions by understanding their strategic objectives and then helping build an analytics roadmap to achieve them. This can be an exercise done towards the beginning of the year or so when you understand what capabilities are required so that the leaders of these functions achieve their objectives. Additionally, it's important to not just deliver reporting scorecards, but also valuable insights from data to help the business team derive maximum value and use data to make decisions. And last but not the least, you will have to partner with IT to build best-in-class solutions using the full power of technology. The IT team can help bring all the data in one place and maintain a single source of truth across teams by consolidating all their business rules. There are also multiple areas where they can play bigger roles, such as if you have done an AI/ML pilot or a natural language processing pilot. To scale it to a large operational process, the IT team can definitely help there, or they can help enable self-service analytics platforms and so on. So these are a few of the key things that we felt was important to communicate and let you know as you start thinking about advancing this in your organization. This was all the content we had, but we're happy to hear from you and any questions that you may have, and we would love to help answer those. There's a Q&A window, I think, where you can help, where you can enter your questions and we help answer them.
All right, we've got one question. How can analytics help companies advance their diversity objectives?
Ishani, do you want me to take that one?
Yes, yes, please.
So I think analytics can really help companies when they're looking across the board, especially for driving, diversity. Because in many ways, when you think about diversity and expanding it across, there can be many different ways you're doing it. So for example, one example that many companies are trying to do it is increasing diversity within their own workforce, but also maybe with their partners and so on. And analytics is best suited to use data and trends to provide insights to drive that objective. So for example, let's take the idea of companies trying to increase diversity in their workforce. Analytics can tell you, is the problem that is there enough talent available? Is there unconscious bias if you're not hiring the right diverse talent? And by looking at data like diversity of slates or diversity of panels, the hiring process, you can really find the enablers to hit your diversity goals.
Great. We've got another question. Do you recommend any analytic solutions to be used or explored?
I can take a stab at that, Priya, and feel free to add. I think one of the things that we've seen is that there may not be an existing solution that will help solve all your answers, right? Because every company's or every function's objectives are pretty different. What we've been able to see is that as long as you understand what the leader wants to achieve in terms of their objectives, then recommending an analytics to them is an easier way to go. And for that, you don't need a specific solution you really can be using the existing suite of tools that your organization may already be using, right? So BI tools like Tableau or ClickView or Spotfire or whatever, and databases like your Redshift and whatever else. But the tools part of it becomes an easy answer. It's more about figuring out what is the analysis that you need to do. And most of these solutions help answer those. It's more about the analytical methodologies that need to be devised.
Yeah. So Ishani is absolutely right? This partly ties back to this whole discussion. Like there hasn't been that much investment in creating analytic solutions for enterprise functions. Having said that, we're starting to see a little bit of it come through. Like I think companies like Workday are starting to add analytical pieces to their solutions. Vizier is out there for some of the HR pieces. But I would honestly say to the point that Ishani made, that in many instances, companies do find themselves taking existing platforms like, Click or Power BI or Tableau or Spotfire and building the solution that's right for them.
Great. It looks like we have time for one more question. What was the biggest challenge you faced as you set up analytics for enterprise functions?
Ishani, do you want to take that? As you watched us sort of build this, what is your reaction? I'd love to add my thoughts to that.
Yeah, I think the partnership with the various stakeholders and getting their buy-in and commitment to do this is honestly the biggest challenge. So, for example, just getting an IT organization partnering with you here is going to be huge. And that was, I think, one of the biggest challenges. And it's not like they didn't want to do it. It's just that there's no investments laid out in most companies for this. But once that initial buy-in came in, everything started flowing in. So I feel that initial buy-in with some of these stakeholders like IT and like your business stakeholders is definitely the most critical as well as the most challenging element.
Yeah. The other one that I'll add, and Ishani is absolutely right, is because this is not an established area. So when we went to each of these functions, we had a very we need your help. We need analytics. The first question around what analytics do you need? It's like, I don't know, because it's not an explored area. So to kind of, rewinding back to one of the second slides we had, a big part of the challenge was to actually sit down and figure out what analytics do each of these functions need. And a lot of that work that Ishani was describing, right, which is going back and having those discussions and saying, okay, what do you focus on? So based on this, what analytics do you need? What kind of roadmap should it be? I would say that took a little bit of work.